This is the multiple award-winning GardenDC podcast, the podcast about everything gardening in the Washington, D.C. and Mid-Atlantic region. I'm your host, Kathy Jentz. I'm the editor of Washington Gardener magazine. Our content is aimed at gardening enthusiasts, people who grow everything, from edibles to ornamentals, natives to exotics. If it grows in our area, that's what we talk about. Welcome to episode 260 of the GardenDC podcast. Are you a fan of both plants and U.S. history? If so, today's episode is sure to captivate your attention. In this episode, we talk with Arthur Chadwick of Chadwick & Sons Orchids, all about First Ladies Orchids. The plant profile is on snake plant, and we share what's going on in the garden, as well as some upcoming local gardening events in the What's New segment. We close out with the last word on the October Leafy Soiree by Christy Page of Green Prints. I'm also going to share my personal favorite orchid. Be sure to listen to the end of the episode for that. This episode, we're joined by Arthur Everett Chadwick, president of Chadwick & Son, Inc. in Powhatan, Virginia. Welcome, Arthur.
Well, thank you for having me.
Great to have you on, and we're going to talk all about your orchid passion and the First Ladies Orchids project. But before we get into all of that, Arthur, we'd like to ask our guests here on the GardenDC podcast, were they born with chlorophyll in their veins and a green thumb? So, were you born with chlorophyll in your veins, Art?
Well, no, I'm an electrical engineer by training, but I grew up in a household with orchids all over the place, but I never really paid attention to them except at prom time. And then suddenly they were very important.
And so I know your father was an orchid breeder and collector. Can you tell me a little bit about him?
Yeah, he was born in 1930, and he grew up at a time when Cattleya orchids were the corsage flower. They were the fashion, and you were underdressed if you didn't wear one when you went out. And for him, it was just a hobby, a lifelong hobby. And he collected them ever since he was a teenager. And when he passed away just a few years ago at age 90, he had 800 of these rare heirloom orchids, and he left them to me. And now it's a tremendous responsibility for me to keep them going for another 100 years.
Wow. And so I was reading a little bit about the history of your father, and he wrote for 50 years for the American Orchid Society, and he was a past president, I believe, as well.
He was past president of the Delaware Orchid Society, but he was a feature writer for the AOS. And you look in any old magazine from the AOS archives, and he's got an article somewhere about some facet of Cattleya growing.
And so you say Cattleya. I've always said Cattleya.
Cattleya, like kitty cat, Cattleya.
Yes, Cattleya.
That's right.
Is there a preferred pronunciation?
Well, there's a lot of ways to say it, but Cattleya, it's named after William Cattley, who first found them. So we just, support his name by saying Cattleya.
That makes much more sense that it's named after a person. So, Mr. Cattley, I'll try to say it your way. And let's talk a little bit about where you're gardening now and Chadwick & Son.
Right. So it's Chadwick & Son Orchids in Powhatan, Virginia. I'm the son in Chadwick & Son. And I have 2 kids, but they're not too interested in orchids at the moment. But you have to be a certain age to really appreciate orchids. For me, it hit at age 25. And then suddenly I was all about it. And so they're reaching about that age. So I'm expecting them to call at any moment.
I can imagine that it would hit them really quickly. And all of a sudden they would be like, wow, these are what I've been looking at all my life. But the light bulb finally turns on, right?
Yes, I'm destined to grow orchids.
So you board over 13,000 orchids for clients. Tell me about orchid boarding.
Yeah, that is the craziest niche. So we've never advertised that we offer orchid boarding. It's always been a service. Just, we'll as a favor, sure, we'll bring your orchid back into bloom, Mrs. Smith, and we'll call you when it's ready. Well, we now have 13,000 orchids that we take care of for people, mostly in the Virginia area. It's $2 a month, and we have them sorted in the different greenhouses based on the type of orchid. All the dendrobiums are in this greenhouse. All the lady slippers are in this greenhouse. And they're all alphabetical by last name, and then they're barcoded on top of that. And one of my employees' entire jobs is just calling people and telling them their orchid is ready.
Wow. I always thought it would be a great niche business to overwinter people's large house plants and other
Sure,
things.
sure.
But I had no idea about this facet of the orchid world. But having them back in bloom when they're returned to you, what a great benefit.
And we have little heated trucks that drive through the Richmond neighborhoods, and they return people's blooming orchids to them. And people leave their out of bloom orchids on the front step, and we pick those up. So we're just like the milkman. That's our business model.
Wow. Yeah. What a great service. And let's talk a little bit about you have 2 retail locations in the Richmond area.
Yep, the 2 stores. Yep, our flagship store is by the Virginia Museum of Fine Arts in the artsy section. And then during COVID, we were bored out of our minds, so we opened another store in the West End for the suburbanites, and that's been doing very, very well as well. So if you're in the Richmond area, you've got orchids at every turn.
And for those listeners who are outside the Mid-Atlantic region, we have people all over the world listening to our podcast. Can you describe the Richmond, Virginia area and Powhatan where you're located? Maybe
Sure.
some of the growing climate as well.
Yes, Powhatan is just a suburb of Richmond, just half an hour outside, but it's a very mild climate. We've got mountains to the west, the Blue Ridge Mountains, and then oceans to the east, just a couple hours away. It's it's not hot, it's not cold, it's just right in the middle. But we still need to keep our orchids inside during the winter because it freezes, 3 or 4 months out of the year. So it's a temperate climate, and orchids do great outside. We always tell people to put them outside for the summer. May to September, your orchids will do great under the trees. They can't take full sun, but they love the humidity, the warm air, the breezes. But then you got to bring them in. And so we're right in the middle there in the mid-Atlantic.
And do you grow other plants besides orchids?
Well, we grow friends of orchids, which would be other tropical plants, philodendrons, monsteras, and palm trees and stuff, but really on a very small scale. It's about the orchids.
Mm-hmm. And I know you do some speaking and traveling for orchid selling and orchid lectures. You just got back from a trip, right?
Right, Hawaii. It was a real tough trip there. The flight actually is pretty brutal, but once you arrive, you're golden. And Hawaii has the absolute perfect climate for orchids. It's never colder than 60 and never warmer than 80 year round. So people just attach them to their trees and they never think twice about it. And if it doesn't rain for a bit, you just splash it with a hose and you're good to go. So I was speaking on both sides of the big island. That's the one with the erupting volcano in the middle. And it's fascinating to watch the townspeople. The first thing they do, they get on their computer and look at their volcano cam to see what the volcano is doing that day. Is the lava going to bury their town? Or are they just going to go up and watch it, sort of tailgate on the volcano?
Mm. Yeah, that is a drawback, but sounds like a perfect climate otherwise. And the abundance of orchids that are endemic to Hawaii, too, must be incredible.
Yes, yes.
So let's talk a little bit about the Cattleyas and their care, because they're not your grocery store Phalaenopsis moth orchid.
Thankfully. I mean, people first get exposed to orchids at the grocery store nowadays, where there's all sorts of Phalaenopsis. Some are dyed blue, and they're in little plastic bags, and they're just miserable. But that may be where you first get your orchid. And then once you master that, I mean, it's a beginner's orchid. Everybody succeeds with the Phalaenopsis. Then you're going to want more after that. So they call us and say, what do we do now? Well, Cattleyas is one of the major types we recommend besides dendrobiums, oncidiums, and lady slippers. And Cattleyas date back to the Victorian times. They've got all the history. So when you go to the big botanical gardens like Longwood Gardens or the Missouri Botanical Garden, they have entire wings devoted to Cattleyas. They're showy, they're fragrant, they're just so incredible. And they've been around for 100 years. My father had many of his plants from the 1800s. I'm looking at one right now from 1882. Here it is blooming in October of 2025, and it has every year since. So orchids will live forever, particularly the Cattleyas, if they're taken care of.
And what special care do they need?
It's really not that much different than Phalaenopsis. They like a little more light. Cattleyas are considered intermediate light orchids, whereas Phalaenopsis are low light orchids. And intermediate light is nothing more than a south-facing window with the blinds partially turned, or a sheer curtain pulled in front of the window, or outside under a trellis. Orchids can't take full sun. They want the light dappled to some degree. And Cattleyas are sort of right in the middle. They grow in the wild in South America in the trees where the leaves filter the light. And you never want your leaves to be warm to the touch on a Cattleya, just sort of, just room temperature.
Well, I'm going to have to live vicariously through other Cattleya growers because I have 3 cats and they would attack them unless they were under glass. But I'm thinking under glass, not the best thing. That air circulation is
Right.
probably needed.
Got to have air circulation, yeah.
Anything else like watering tips?
Watering once a week, and we always recommend using warm water for all your orchids. Orchids are from the jungles where it's warm. There's hot and sticky, the breezes, everything about an orchid climate is warm. So you want to give it warm water. We preheat our well water before we even apply it in the greenhouse. But people can just go to their sink and just turn on water, what you would wash your hands with, and drench your orchid with warm water, and it'll think it's back in the rainforest.
So ignore that just add ice cubes type of thing.
That is the worst imaginable advice for a tropical plant, is to get anything cold, let alone ice water or snow or anything freezing. They're tropical.
And when you say warm, like bath warm?
Well, no, just comfortable, like maybe you would take a shower in.
And then fertilizing. I'm imagining that these are probably heavy feeders.
Actually, they're light feeders. In the jungle, the only fertilizer an orchid gets is when a monkey walks by. So we're trying to duplicate the wild conditions. We don't have monkeys, of course, but we just use weak solutions of a general purpose fertilizer. It doesn't need to be orchid food. It can be just a general purpose plant food mixed in with the water, maybe once a month or every other month. Some people use time release, but just weak solutions because orchid roots are sensitive.
And that's just mixed in with the water when you're watering them?
Yep.
Not like, putting a pellet or a little squirt or something in there.
Right. You really want to get down into the roots. The leaves don't take up much. It's all about the roots.
And then the growing medium. So I hear, there's orchid bark people, and then there's peat or sphagnum moss.
Yes, there's 2 schools of thought. One is sphagnum moss, which is very sponge-like substance. It's very easy to work with. It comes solid in a bag, and you soak it in water ahead of time, and it swells up, and you grab a handful and just wrap it around the roots. Then the other media is bark chips, fir bark usually, and these are about the size of nickels or so. They're chunky and air gets between them, and that's nice. Orchids are epiphytes. They need to have air to their roots. But the key with the media is to match the pot with the media. So when we use sphagnum moss, we use clay pots because sphagnum moss holds water, whereas clay pot sucks the water out. Likewise, with bark chips, we would use plastic pots because the bark drains and seems dry instantly, but the plastic holds the water. So it's a nice balance, either clay with sphagnum or bark with plastic.
Great advice. And I think sometimes it just comes down to personal preference for which medium you like.
Yeah, definitely.
And the aerial roots. Let's talk about those.
Aerial roots, right. So in the wild, orchids cover the sides of trees. Sometimes they're so heavily laden, the whole limb breaks off. So what the roots naturally want to do is spread out and just go places. And you could encourage that by spritzing them and they just keep going. They're 2 or 3 feet long. Or you can try to curl them around in the pot. But just because the roots are jumping out of the pot doesn't mean it needs to be repotted. Now, eventually, if there's roots just everywhere, you might repot it. And all that is, you just take off the old media, wrap moss around the new roots, and usually put it back in the same pot. They like to be pot bound. They always look top-heavy like they're about to fall over, but that's when they're their happiest, in small little pots.
And you would probably do that replacement of the potting medium every 2 to 3 years?
Yeah, approximately. I mean, moss becomes kind of gooey after a while, and bark chips become sawdusty. It's no longer breathable. So it's really just changing the media and put it back in the pot.
Well, it sounds like pretty easy care. And, all I ever hear is how sensitive orchids are.
That is the stereotype, yes.
So I think the biggest crux that people have is getting them back into bloom. So if you keep them in the same household spot, the same window, the same conditions, the same indoor air, temperatures all year round, they're probably not going to rebloom right.
Well, that's true for Phalaenopsis because Phalaenopsis need that temperature drop in the fall to get them to bloom in the winter. But Cattleyas like the same temperature all the time. They make their new leaf and they bloom. They make a new leaf and they bloom. So it's not temperature dependent. It's just comfortable temperatures is what they like.
That's great to hear. And Cattleyas, are they fragrant? They're known for being fragrant, right?
Oh my gosh, yes. There's one you can smell from the other side of the room. But yeah, that's one of their signature trademarks is the fact that their fragrance is so appealing. Phalaenopsis generally don't smell unless you kill them and the bulbs are rotting. But the Cattleyas, the flowers themselves are extremely fragrant, different versions of sweetness. So they were ideal for corsage flowers because they smelled good.
Yeah, you were talking about the Cattleya fashion, started with the Victorians, and not going to talk too much about personal hygiene, but that's why I think some of these big, really highly scented, fragrant flowers were in, and you kept it kind of close, right? That you can put your nose into it when you have an unpleasant smell around you.
For sure.
But were they worn mainly by ladies, or did gentlemen wear them as well?
Really, just the ladies, but they didn't just wear them on their lapel. They had them in their hair. They had them on their wrist, on their waist. Mamie Eisenhower used to wear them on her waist. Jacqueline Kennedy had the pocketbook corsage. They were attached to her purse. There's just many ways to wear them. It brings elegance to the entire event.
And would you wear more than one, or is that tacky?
If you look at the old pictures of here's Mrs. Woodrow Wilson, she's got four on her lapel.
Mm,
It was common to do it up. The bigger the event, the wilder you got.
nice. Especially if you had a personal collection that you could pull from. Well, now, if I had one or two Cattleya plants, I would be very loath, Art, to cut one and wear it. So this is not an inexpensive hobby, is it?
Well, it's true that it's a shame to cut a Cattleya flower because they only bloom once a year and the flowers last about a month on the plant. And once you cut it, they last about 3 days. But if you have that special event, certainly a wedding bouquet or, floral arrangement, sometimes you got to pull out all the stops.
Yeah, I think for special event, it would be worth it. But otherwise, you want to enjoy it daily, as you said, for that
Right.
month or so of bloom. And that's what's one great aspect of orchids is their long-lasting blooms.
That's right. Now, the Phalaenopsis, they last 3 months, so people are spoiled by that. Most other orchids last 1 to 2 months, and the Cattleyas fall into that range. But you can count on Cattleyas at the exact same time every year. So I'm looking at some October bloomers right now, and these bloom every October and have for decades, and they'll continue to do so. Whereas Phalaenopsis are seasonal. They naturally bloom January through April, and if they bloom at any other time, they've been forced and then they're going to revert back to that January through April time season once you get the plant back at home. So Cattleyas, if you time it right, you can have something in bloom every day of the year. There's no other orchid that will do that.
Wow. So with your October bloomers and your breeding work, what is the future of Cattleyas? Do people
Well,
look for specific colors, patterning?
they're having a renaissance because people like the old stuff. The old stuff. So since Cattleyas, there are 100-year-old plants around, you can get a 100-year-old plant. You can get a 50-year-old plant. You can get anything from whatever time period you want. And the corsage days is one time period that people really go for. They like the lure of what used to be. So the corsage period in the United States was roughly the 20s to the 60s. And there's many, many hybrids out there that you can obtain from that time period. So you can see the exact flowers that were used for corsages.
Why do you think the corsage era went out, Art?
Well, it's a very, very sad story. My father has told it to me many times. It started with the Cymbidium orchid,
Hmm.
which is another very floriferous variety, but they make 10 to 15 flowers on a stem and maybe 10, up to 10 stems on a plant. So growers were able to produce flowers much more cheaply than Cattleyas by using cymbidiums, and they brought the cost down a lot. So from say $20 for a corsage, maybe it was like $5 a corsage. And then it was on the checkout counter at the grocery stores in little cellophane boxes, and it lost its glamour. And once something loses its glamour, it's all over. So that's the Cattleyas kind of started the down spiral about in the 60s as the cymbidiums were really coming on. They were both in the orchid family, and that's great. But the cymbidiums don't have the glamour that the Cattleyas, the big floppy fragrance and the colorful blooms. And then once it lost its glamour, then people didn't want to wear them anymore. So by the 80s, it was all over.
That's too bad. But I'm glad to hear about the Renaissance now. And yeah, a lot of the Victorian hobbies are now big again.
Yeah. Yeah, the fern craze. Everybody has ferns all over their office and that.
Yeah, I'm a big fern fan myself, and not because, Victorian era, but more because I can overwater them.
Yes, they're very, very forgiving.
Yes, they're easy plants, and they can be in terrariums under glass, so
Yes.
protected from those kitties. So let's talk about your book. So that's First Ladies and Their Orchids. I have it here with me, A Century of Namesake Cattleyas. Let's talk about that century. It starts with Mrs. Wilson.
Mrs. Woodrow Wilson, sure, in 1912. And there's pictures of her wearing these quadruple corsages that are just mind-blowing. And so every First Lady since then, 19 consecutive First Ladies, have had a namesake Cattleya orchid all the way through today. And so there's a chapter on each of these ladies in the book.
And who started that tradition?
Well, I'd say the first one was in the 20s with Mrs. Herbert Hoover. That was the first one named. And then it skipped a few years. And then Mrs. Bess Truman, she had one. And then Mamie Eisenhower had one. And these are different growers all over the country that are making these hybrids. But before long, there was about 6 or 8 of them. And so we saw the trend there, even though it wasn't apparent to everyone else. And so we picked up the tradition, starting with Barbara Bush in the 80s. But then we did a few that had been missing. So Lady Bird Johnson, she had never had one, which is unbelievable. She was the big flower person.
Yeah, that's crazy that she didn't have one named after her.
Eleanor Roosevelt didn't have one. That's hard to believe. Her husband had 3 or 4, but she didn't have any. So we did that one. And Mrs. Wilson. And we did some others that were missing. So now the whole idea is to have a continuum that we can look to that sort of shows what they used to wear in those days and really represents the First Lady of the times.
And do you know of any collectors who want to have all the First Lady orchids?
Certainly. I think every collector wants all of them, but they're not all available. We're trying to come out with them. We're trying to get the old ones that other breeders made and clone them and make them available for everyone. But it's a 7-year process for any Cattleya from when it's a baby to when it blooms. And if you're cloning seedlings, then you've got 7 years plus 7 years. Now you've got 14 years. But eventually we'll have a good representation for everyone.
Yeah, I'd love to see an exhibition of all of them, like at a show or something.
Well, the Philadelphia Flower Show coming up in February, we're doing a big feature exhibit on the floor that's all about the First Lady orchids with mannequins wearing corsages and the whole history, the pictures. And we actually have some I wouldn't, for lack of a better word, paraphernalia from the First Lady families that are being donated to the exhibit. It's a 9-day show, and they'll be in glass cases. It'll have a museum-like quality. I think people are really going to respond to that. That's
going to be something to really look forward to at the Philadelphia Flower Show next year. So that's end of February, early March.
Yep.
At the Philadelphia Convention Center, obviously in downtown Philadelphia. So they're already got passes on sale, I think, through the Pennsylvania Hort Society. So you can plan ahead for your trip up to see those and that exhibit. That's going to be wonderful. And are you going to be there yourself, Art, the whole 9 days?
The whole 9 days. Well, certainly I'll be there for the building of it, which is no small task. It's 28 feet long. And then I'll have some employees with me during the other 9 days to talk to people.
And that would be great to be able to interact with the public and then talk about the orchids. And I know Waldorf Orchids always has a fabulous orchid exhibit. I don't know what their theme is for this coming year, but it'll be interesting to contrast that.
Yes, and actually the theme for the whole show is about the 250th anniversary of America. So everybody's they're tying in somehow to that theme. And the First Ladies is front and center because they were there from the beginning.
I'm trying to remember how to say it. Sesquicentennial, I think, is the 250th. I'm going to have to keep practicing that because it's obviously going to be a big deal for us here in DC and Philadelphia and most of America next year.
Bicentennial was so much easier to pronounce.
Yes, so much easier. So let's start with talking about some of those First Lady orchids. And maybe let's start with Jacqueline Kennedy, because I know you were talking about her having the purse corsage. What does a purse corsage look like? Is it just attached to your purse with a little...
that's all it is. She wanted the glamour of the appearance when you walk in with an orchid, but then she didn't want it pinned on her the whole time. She wanted to be able to put it down and mingle and then pick it back up again and be glamorous, then put it down and mingle. So she sort of invented that concept. And then once she did it, suddenly everyone wanted a pocketbook corsage.
Nice. Yeah, there's a concept of purse first, like the purse enters the room first.
Yeah, perfect.
She sounds like she invented that one.
Right.
Can you describe what that orchid looks like for our listeners?
Certainly. It's a beautiful white with a purple throat. It was bred in the early 60s by a grower in Tennessee, and it's still around. You can still find these plants. We have a number of them. We just got it cloned, so now we've got little babies, and in 7 years they'll be available by the thousands, but they're still in collections around the country. Longwood Gardens has some. The Smithsonian has some. It's really a treat to see the old classics.
And I think I was at the British Ambassador's residence earlier this year, and I think he had a couple of them as well.
I think so.
In his collection. So I'm looking at the Mamie Eisenhower orchid, and that to me is like the classic Cattleya look.
Right, the big floppy purple. This was bred in the 50s by a grower in California, and there are very few of those around. We have one, and maybe there's a couple more. But also, we're getting that one cloned because if we don't do it, it's if our mother plant dies, it's gone. But it's a big floppy purple with a wonderful fragrance. She was never seen without a Cattleya somewhere on her lapel because my father said that was the absolute glory days of the Cattleya flower because for 8 years she wore them wherever she went. And so if you wanted to, be glamorous like a first lady, you could do that as well with your neighborhood florist.
And the White House, many people don't know, used to have a huge greenhouse attached to it or on the side. And I imagine a lot of that greenhouse was taken up with orchid growing.
Yeah, in place, before there was the West Wing, there was about 6 or 8 giant glass greenhouses attached directly to the White House. And the first ladies would entertain in there. This is in the late 1800s. And one whole greenhouse was just for orchids. And foreign dignitaries would bring them over from South America or wherever as a sort of a donation to the administration, and they would add them to the collection. And they would go out at nights and entertain in the glass greenhouses. But they were torn down in 1902 to make way for the West Wing. But really, the old pictures tell the story.
I can imagine the fragrance and being in there at night, especially, how wonderful that would be.
Yeah, completely. Now, that same architecture can still be found at the U.S. Botanic Garden.
And, of course, at the U.S. Botanic Garden, which is closed now during the federal shutdown, or as we're recording this. Right. We're not able to access the orchid collection right now, but hopefully soon that will be back open for us.
Yes, hopefully.
GardenDC will be back after this short break.
Get low-maintenance alternatives to lawns with Ground Cover Revolution by Kathy Jentz. Reducing the lawn is among the biggest trends in homeownership, with an endless stream of homeowners looking for an eco-friendly alternative to a traditional turfgrass lawn. In the last few years alone, over 23 million Americans converted part of the lawn to a natural landscape, and now they're looking to do even more. The biggest challenge to adopting this new ideal of the perfect lawn? Knowing how and when to replace your turf and which plants are the best ones for the job. Ground Cover Revolution is here with all the answers you need, and some you didn't even know you needed. Included are 40 in-depth profiles of plants that are perfect choices for replacing a grass lawn. There are options for sun, for shade, for dry and wet sites, and for various climates around the globe. There are choices that bloom options that are evergreen, and selections that are deer-resistant. Cathy Gents has also included an incredibly useful chart that gives you all the specifics on each of the 40 choices for quick reference and to make your ground cover selection process even easier. Whether you want to replace the entire lawn or just reduce the amount of land dedicated to turf, Ground Cover Revolution will help you usher in a new and improved idea of what a beautiful lawn should be. Ground Cover Revolution is available now wherever you buy books, including Amazon.com and Bookshop.org.
How do you top your love for your cat? With a cascade of decadent, savory gravy over a mouth-watering mousse pâté. Fancy Feast gems. 2 gourmet pâtés in one convenient pack. Simply peel and plate to reveal a pyramid shape that makes eating delightful and pamper her with an experience as extraordinary as she is. Turn the everyday into the extraordinary with Fancy Feast gems.
I was looking at some of the earlier First Ladies that have orchids named after them, the Florence Harding. And that's kind of an interesting looking one to me.
Yes, so she didn't have one during her time period. Her husband had a number of them. It was always the men that got the glory. They got ones named after them, even though they didn't wear them. But Florence didn't have any orchids named after her. So we went ahead and contacted her presidential administration and developed one in keeping with what she might have worn at the times. So a very old hybrid using old parents. And so this is what we have to offer in the modern day, but it represents what she might have had back then.
And I like in the book that you give the lineage, the breeding background of the orchids.
Yes, for the purists who want to know what went into that flower.
I mean, they could potentially recreate it from that breeding stock if it got lost.
Yes, you could. If you have both parents and you cross-pollinate them and you wait for the seeds to develop on the plant, and you plant them in little petri dishes in a laboratory for several years, and then you raise them in little community pots in your greenhouse. After 7 years, you too can have one of those First Lady orchids.
Yeah, I think most people, they would just be happy to see them, not have to breed them.
Right.
So moving along to Mrs. Grace Coolidge.
Mm-hmm.
Her orchid, it's kind of like, I'm going to describe it as a dusty purple, like a deeper one.
Right. This is another one that we had to recreate because she didn't have any orchids named after her. Her husband had several. So we used parents that were very old from the 30s at the time and recreated something that she might have had. But it's a beautiful, fragrant thing that she would have worn. There's actually a famous picture of her in a greenhouse full of her namesake chrysanthemums. Now, they're not orchids, but she was obviously a flower person. Mm-hmm. So we wanted to honor her with her very own orchid.
Interesting. And the shape of it is more, I would say, wide than some of the others.
Right. It's sort of the early hybrid look before things got perfectly round and flat like today. Breeders tend to selectively breed them for dinner plate size and look. But the early hybrids is where it all started. And this is what the old First Ladies would have worn.
Why do you think, so they were breeding for that flat open look just because it looked better?
Well, it's all subjective what's better looking, and the old look is back in style. But a lot of the current breeding has to do with the American Orchid Society's judging standards, and they grade them for round and flat. So breeders say, well, gee, I can get awards from the American Orchid Society if I breed my orchids round and flat. So over time, they've developed into these dinner plate-like things, but there's sort of a backlash from the public. They want something with character.
Mm-hmm. I was going to say the same thing, that what the judges are looking for is not what the public is looking for. I kind of like the more spidery look, like, the more open air between the different petals.
Oh, they would count off all kinds of points for air between the petals.
But it's more interesting looking, I think.
Totally.
And so Mrs. Herbert Hoover, Lou Henry Hoover's. Yes. So she has an interesting one that does have kind of openness to it.
Very much a real frilly type. And we thought that was so perfect that we put it on the cover of the book. But it's the original 1929 hybrid. And nobody had seen one since the 20s. And we just happened to stumble across one at an orchid meeting. A member brought one in and said, "Hey, I've got this little orchid." I said, "Oh my gosh, do you realize what you have there?" And so she let me have a piece. And from that one piece, we've cloned it. And now our babies are almost blooming size. So it'll be back in circulation. And people want the old stuff.
Yeah, I think this would be a really cool one to have. Any other favorites from the more recent First Ladies?
Gosh, they're all great. It's really hard to say. I mean, let's see. Betty Ford's is one that's still being produced on a large scale by the grower who bred it in Chicago, Hauserman Orchids. This is enormous purple flowers. It's actually almost too big to make a corsage out of, but it makes an incredible specimen plant. And he's got, hundreds of them on the bench still, full size. And so you can get one of those today. And that was bred in the early 80s.
And so you just would go to an orchid sale or show and ask for Orchid Betty Ford. So it's literally, that's just the name of it, is Betty Ford. Looking at Rosalind Carter's, since she's a favorite First Lady of many.
Yes.
And so that one was introduced during her time.
Yes, but it was bred by a South American grower. It's the only hybrid that wasn't bred in the U.S. It was bred by a Venezuelan, and he presented it to her when she came to his country just on as an envoy. And so he made national news, actually international news, with this orchid he had bred and was handing to an incoming U.S. First Lady. But the problem with that is we've never seen the plant in person other than the photographs that were taken at the presentation. So we don't have a plant. So what we'd like to do is find the parents and rebreed it and then clone it. So that's 14 years?
Wow. And so nobody has that original plant that was handed to her that day?
Right. I mean, if someone has one in the audience, boy, please contact me because we pay big money for that.
I can't believe that, I want to say it was lost, but you would think that would have been an orchid that would have been highly taken care of and prized.
Right. And it was, according to her records, she did take a plant back with her on Air Force One, 1977, but it was never seen after that. Maybe it went to one of the botanical gardens or she took it home, but nobody's heard from it since.
An orchid mystery to be solved.
Yes.
Interesting. Maybe one of her family members might be able to solve that. So
that would be lovely.
We'll put that out there into the ether.
That would fill the missing space. That's really one of only two that are missing. The other one is Nancy Reagan's orchid. It was bred in California and widely circulated, but I've never seen one. And I've run full page ads in orchid magazines looking for one, and nobody has one. But we have to get one so that we can breed it, clone it, and make it available to everyone.
Okay, amateur sleuths and plant nerds out there, you have your work cut out for you. We need both the Nancy Reagan and the Rosalind Carter.
Yes, please. I'd be forever grateful.
And let's talk about Barbara Bush.
So she did grow up at a time when orchids were the corsage flower, but she didn't have one named after her. So we bred one that would look perfect for her. It was a white with a purple lip, and she was speaking in Richmond. Many First Ladies come to Richmond because it's just south of Washington. So we were all excited. We were going to present the flower to her. And just before the presentation, the flowers folded.
Oh, no.
They only last a month, The timing has to be just right. So we couldn't present it. So we waited till the following year when they rebloomed and then sent her a box of her namesake orchids to Houston. And she wrote me a series of lovely letters thanking me for those flowers. One of the letters said, "My mother would be proud." She never said she was proud. It was her mother that was proud because she was a big garden clubber. She was in the Garden Club of America. And back then, orchids were very important to the members.
And so I'm imagining that is very available.
I wouldn't say very available, but we have some. And we were getting it cloned once again. It's a long process, this orchid thing.
So let's talk about Hillary Rodham Clinton. So that was bred 1993 by you and, it says, Carmela.
It was actually bred in Hawaii by a grower named Carmela Orchids. who are still there. But it was an unnamed hybrid that we had, and it bloomed, and it was just spectacular. So we asked the breeder, could we name it? And they said, sure, sure. So we named it for the first lady, who was at the time Mrs. Clinton. And, you want to present the flower. You don't want to just name it and sit it and look at it.
Mm-hmm.
So there's a whole story about how the hoops we had to jump through to present an orchid to a first lady. That was my first time. And gosh, you go through your local politicians, you go through anyone who might know the first lady's family. And after many years of trying, 3 or 4 years of trying, and rejection letters, flat out rejection letters, I don't have time for this orchid. Finally, we got in, and she said, oh, I just love it. And I had 2 minutes with her. And I said, gee, 2 minutes, that's it? And her assistant said, most people get 2 seconds.
Well, for an orchid to be named after me, I would give you 2 hours at least, if not more. I can't even imagine. I mean, who wouldn't be just so flattered to have a beautiful flower named after them in perpetuity,
Yes.
and for always to be there. And so let's move on to the other Mrs. Bush, Laura Bush.
Right. So many people don't realize that she's a big-time gardener. She's active in the Dallas Garden Club. So when I speak down there in Dallas, there she is in the front row. It's a little unnerving to be talking about the First Lady Orchids, and there is a First Lady. So we had this dialogue going. I picked a beautiful compact hybrid that was also bred in Hawaii, and I named it after her. And we've presented it a number of times over the years because she's a big horticulturalist. She grows her own Laura Bush orchids in Dallas. And this is a lovely flower. It's a medium size. It's got flares on the petals. So it's sort of patriotic, the way her husband was known for that. And it's got a big award from the American Orchid Society. It's a real beauty.
Mm-hmm. And I love that it has kind of like a yellow, just like a light touch of yellow in the middle.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Right. These are all seed variations. And, if you've got 50 on the bench in bloom, you pick the best one of the 50 that's maybe the most vigorous, the most floriferous. Maybe it's got the best color. You try to find all the best characteristics to make it variety First Lady. And that's the one that becomes famous.
So our next First Lady, Michelle Obama, was known for gardening, but more for the edible side of gardening.
That's true. And her hybrid, I actually bred myself. And so I waited for the 7 years to bloom, and it was just a beautiful purple, very long lasting, almost 2 months this flower lasts. And so the first lady at the time was Michelle Obama. Let's present her this orchid. So she was in Virginia, and I got to present it to her. Originally I had it in a big specimen plant just loaded with blooms. And we were outside of Washington. She was giving a speech, and she didn't have a big security group with her. And they said, you can't bring that orchid in here, sir. There could be a bomb in the orchid. A bomb in the orchid? Please. That would be the worst thing for business. So, but the security guard allowed me to pick off a few flowers. So I presented her with those flowers, as well as the official certificate from the World Horticultural Society that says this is what it is. And so she was thrilled. She's almost as tall as I am, and I'm 6'5". And so we did the Obama bump, and it was a lovely time.
Wow, I knew she was tall, but I didn't know she was that tall. Wow.
Well, I am. She seemed that tall.
And so Melania Trump is next in the lineup.
Yes. So she's a little exotic. She's from another country. So we picked a flower that was not a typical white or purple. So it's sort of, there's rust colors and burgundies, and it's very interesting. The seedlings vary all over the place, but we've got several of them awarded from the American Orchid Society. Exotic colors, really a knockout. There's nothing else like it.
Yeah, you're right. It's kind of sunsetty, but onto the russet side of things. And then Jill Biden's is, I would say, almost lemon colored. I love that. Lemon. Yeah.
She's a blonde, so we said, well, let's go with a blonde orchid. You can do that, So we had a nice yellow. It smells lemony, and she's from Delaware, where I'm from, and she lives right across the street from my high school. So we have a lot of common friends. It was an easy presentation to give to her. And I had half an hour with her in the green room at the White House. And, she was really into it. And we walked around the portraits, the First Lady portraits. Here's Mamie Eisenhower with her portrait. Here's Lady Bird Johnson with her orchid. She's, I'm going to have a portrait one day. I wonder if my orchid should be in the portrait. Well, I seconded that motion.
For sure. And did it turn out that way?
Well, it hasn't happened yet. The portraits don't come out for a number of years after the First Lady leaves office. But I guess that I'll find out soon.
Yep, crossing our fingers.
Yes.
So orchids are not just named after presidents and first ladies. Many, many orchids are introduced every year and named after other notables. Can you highlight some of those other orchids?
Well, gosh, there's actually several 100,000 named orchid hybrids. We only focus on the Cattleya, but even of that, there's tens of thousands. And the ones that are with the prominent names are the ones that get all the attention. So we did one for Farrah Fawcett, the actress, working with her foundation in California. That's a beautiful thing. And we worked with Priscilla Presley, giving her a big purple. She told me that we had lunch and dinner together. She told me that when she was 16, Elvis gave her 16 purple Cattleyas for her birthday.
Wow.
And ever since then, she's been hooked on Cattleyas. So we picked a nice big purple. We actually had a dialogue going for a while until we finalized the right orchid. And since then, it's gotten a big award from the American Orchid Society. We've cloned it. And it's a real beauty. We stay in contact regularly, she and I.
And a lot of orchids, of course, are not named after people. They might be named after something abstract or an element of their looks,
Absolutely. It just has to be 26 letters or less. It can't have anything obscene, and it can't have been used before.
And then you register that with the Royal Horticultural Society?
Yep. RHS in England keeps track of all the hybrid names.
Wow. And approximately how many new orchids are introduced every year, or named orchids?
Well, that's a good question. Phalaenopsis are no longer have names on them. If you look at all the grocery store plants, there's not a name in them other than Phalaenopsis. And so they were so mass produced, they just gave up on the name. They stopped providing names. But all the other orchids have names. Lady slippers have names, and dendrobiums have names. So maybe there's several thousand new hybrids that are registered each year for the orchids that still get names.
And I always think in breeding plants art of all the little baby seedlings that didn't make it and didn't get named. So there's, behind the maybe 1,000 that get introduced, there's 100,000 or more that never made it.
That's probably true. And back in the cut flower days, they didn't feel the need to register a hybrid. They were just trying to make pretty flowers. So they would make their own hybrids and just bloom them. And here's the purples, here's the whites, here's the white with purple lips. They didn't have names, or maybe the parents were listed, but they didn't register the hybrids because they didn't need to.
And for registration, it basically gets you naming rights, of course, and then for future sales.
Certainly. Now, if you're not the breeder of that, then you have to get the breeder's permission. But they usually give you their permission. But if you bred it, you can name it whatever you want. It's your baby. You've waited 7 years. You deserve it.
Definitely. I always think about also in plant naming, the rules about naming thoroughbred horses. Very similar.
Really?
I think now it might be 17 letters. I have to research and check that out. But the 26 letters is much more leeway for the orchid naming.
Interesting. Yeah, the horse breeding.
Can't name the same one. Has to be unique and different. So that's why you get some really funky names these days because you're running out.
Right.
Yep. And where can our listeners contact you to find out more, Art?
Well, ideally, they come to Richmond, Virginia, and see these things in person. We've got 2 retail stores in the city, and then our 13 orchid greenhouses are just outside the city. But they can always get on our website or chadwickorchids.com, or email me questions anytime, art@chadwickorchids. I'm glad to help. And I love to give lectures all over the country on orchids to civic groups, plant groups. I'll be speaking at the World Orchid Conference in Dresden, Germany in March for all the German listeners. But why not? Orchids are still the number 1 houseplant. They have been for decades, and I think they're going to continue to be.
I think so too. And we're looking forward to that Philadelphia Flower Show exhibit. And many of our listeners can come up and meet you there from the area. And of course, internationally, the Philadelphia Flower Show does draw attendance from all over as well.
Absolutely.
And so any final advice, Art, for Cattleya lovers, or Cattleya, as I should be saying, lovers? Is it possible to have just one, or when you get the collecting bug, it really bites?
It's a slippery slope. You start with 1 and then you get 10 and then you have 100. And, that's what our orchid boarding program is for, because if you have 100 or 500 plants, you can't keep them all in your house. So you send them off to camp for us to babysit. And then we call you with just the blooming ones, which you can enjoy.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Art.
Thank you.
GardenDC will be back after this short break.
In the book The Urban Garden by Cattleya Gents and Terry Spate, you'll find dozens of inspiring and creative ways to grow flowers, shrubs, vegetables, herbs, and other plants in small spaces and with a limited budget. Whether you want to grow on a balcony, rooftop, front stoop, or a tiny urban patio, turn your growing dreams into reality and build a gorgeous and unique garden that showcases your personal style while still being functional and productive. With the ingenious ideas and resourceful tactics found here, you'll be maximizing yields and beauty from every square inch of your space. No matter what you grow, the 101 amazing growing ideas found in the urban garden will turn your tiny urban yard into a treasure trove of green you'll be proud to share with family and friends. Buy your copy today at your local retail bookseller or order it online now at Amazon.com or bookshop.org.
The detective said missing kids usually come home. What happens when they don't?
Based on a true story.
Police looking for John Gacy.
We discovered bodies. By the looks of it, they're younger men.
The things he did to those kids. He's sick.
The system failed these families.
Devil in Disguise, John Wayne Gacy. Streaming now, only on Peacock.
Do you know how many there are?
Up to you to find out.
Snake plant profile. Snake plant, Dracaena trifasciata, formerly Sansevieria, is also known as mother-in-law's tongue, St. George's sword, and viper's bowstring hemp. It has sword-like foliage that is quite striking. There are several cultivars available with a variety of striping, patterns, and growth habits. It's a popular houseplant because it is undemanding and low maintenance. It tolerates low light levels and infrequent watering. It's best to plant them in a well-draining cactus potting mix in a clay or terracotta pot. During the winter, water it only every couple of months. It will rot if it's overwatered, and do not water them in the center of the rosette. In the spring, mature snake plants can develop green-white flowers that later turn into orange berries. It's native to Western Africa, Southern Asia, and Madagascar. They are hardy to USDA zones 10 to 12. Snake plant is propagated easily from cuttings and root divisions. When taking a cutting, let it dry for a few days to form a callus, then place it directly into well-draining potting mixes to form roots. Rooting hormone is generally not needed. Keep the plant dusted, fertilize it with a weak liquid solution every few weeks if desired. If a leaf is damaged, cut it off at the base. Snake plant, you can grow that. What's new in the garden this week? Well, I'm enjoying the fall color change of my Virginia creeper vine and the mid-season toad lily flowers. At the plot, we are harvesting our cowpeas, and now that the rabbits have finally left them alone, we're getting a good crop. In garden tips that we shared on social media this week, we talked about seed saving, including that if you want to collect open-pollinated seeds next year, now is the time to start planning for planting distances. For instance, tomatoes must be at least 20 feet apart for seed purity, while cucumbers must be at least a half mile. In local gardening events, if you're in the DC area, you might want to attend the final garden workshop and celebration on November 8th at the Capital Area Food Bank on Puerto Rico Avenue Northeast, Washington, D.C. You'll learn how to winterize your garden, dye fabric with indigo, enjoy a potluck and hot chocolate bar, and build connections with other gardeners. You can find out more about that at capitalareafoodbank.org. And then the District 1 Garden Clubs are having District 1 Day on Monday, November 10th from 11 a.m. to 9 p.m. at Franklin's Restaurant, Brewery, and General Store on Route 1 on Baltimore Avenue in Hyattsville, Maryland. The District 1 fundraiser is Fun for All, and you just mentioned District 1, and Franklin's will donate 20% of the receipt to the District Garden Clubs. For more information, check out franklinsbrewery.com. And then looking ahead to a Longwood Christmas at Longwood Gardens in Kennett Square, Pennsylvania. It starts on November 21st and runs through January 11th, 2026. Guests are invited to experience the gardens transformed into a radiant celebration of gemstones, horticultural treasures, and holiday artistry. The time tickets are available at longwoodgardens.org. Happy gardening!
This is Christy Page with Green Prints with the last word on October's fabulous leafy soiree, a story by Hannah Doherty Campbell. October gave a party. The leaves by hundreds came, the chestnuts, oak, and maples, and leaves of every name. The sunshine spread a carpet, and everything was grand. Miss Weather led the dancing, Professor Wind the band. Mrs. Hannon, our beloved fourth-grade teacher, must have realized we were exhausted from reciting "Oh, Captain, my Captain," and trying to remember every detail of Paul Revere's Midnight Dash. One crisp fall day, she switched it up by teaching us George Cooper's delightful poem, October Gave a Party. And get this, she even set it to a melody we actually loved. 63 years later, most of my classmates and I still remember the tune. We sang it to our kids, grandkids, and now, as a teacher myself, I sing it to my students. Cooper's magical autumn party has stuck with us all these years. Ah, leaves. If you live on the East Coast, you know that fall isn't just a season, it's an event. Every year we get an influx of leaf peepers who fill up New England hotels and block every scenic road with their slow-driving caravans. Leaves are so precious to these folks that some even gather them into envelopes and mail them to relatives, so they too can experience the crisp smell and vibrant colors. Meanwhile, kids see leaves and think jumping material. They hurl themselves into massive piles right before their parents bag them up for curbside pickup. As for my husband Mike, he lets the leaves stay where they fall, and honestly, I don't mind. Our yard ends up looking like a beautiful stained glass puzzle of golds, reds, and oranges. And hey, it's good for the soil, right? Speaking of leaves, did you know they're garden gold? Forget bagging them up. Just run over them with a lawnmower and voila, instant mulch. They help keep the soil in place and can be added to compost piles for that extra nutrient boost. Leaf mold, as experts call it, works wonder in potting soil, and if you're still not convinced, there are countless YouTube tutorials out there on how to make the most of your leafy treasures. I sometimes miss the old Philly days when burning leaves was legal. That autumn smell rising in the crisp air, mingling with the scent of apple barrels and pumpkin fields, it felt like the very essence of fall. I remember one autumn in particular when I brought my Aunt Aggie a pumpkin. As the creative soul she was, she gave me a playful nudge and said, "This needs some leaves." So there I went, running to the parking lot, gathering the prettiest ones I could find to complete her fall centerpiece. Now I'll admit, tree identification is not my strong suit. I can only recognize one tree, the tulip poplar. Its leaves look like the tulip-shaped flowers that bloom in spring, and I love that little connection. If you read further in October Gave a Party, you'll notice that Cooper names the trees and colors as their characters at the party. Leaves may be the most undervalued part of a tree, but to me, they're nature's grand finale. Each fall, they create a dazzling cathedral of color, a final bow before winter sweeps in with its monochromatic palette. So here's to the leaves, whether you're raking them, jumping in them, or just admiring them from your window. Their celebration of all that's glorious about fall, and October's party wouldn't be the same without them. This has been The Last Word by Christy Page at greenprints.com.
Thank you for listening to GardenDC. This episode was made by real humans. It was produced and hosted by myself, Kathy Jentz, with editing assistance from intern Cavett Ireland. The Let the Sunshine music interludes are by James Mulvaney. If you like this episode, you may also enjoy listening to Episode 15, Orchids with Carol Allen, Episode 175, Herstory of DC Gardens, Episode 153, An American Garden Story. By the way, you can become a listener, supporter, or subscriber. Find that link in our show notes. Another way to support this podcast is to subscribe to our monthly digital publication, Washington Gardener Magazine. To do so, go to WashingtonGardener.com or WashingtonGardener.blogspot.com. You can find Washington Gardener on Twitter or X, Instagram, Blue Sky, and Pinterest at WDC Gardener, and on Facebook at Washington Gardener Magazine. And be sure to leave us a 5-star review on your favorite podcast listening app. Please take a moment to share us on social media with hashtag GardenDC and with your gardening friends so other gardeners can find us too. My personal favorite orchid is the Oncidium Sherry Baby, aka the Dancing Lady Orchid. It blooms twice a year with long, arcing bloom spikes of small maroon and white flowers, but it's most highly prized for its irresistible fragrance that's been compared to both chocolate and vanilla. Do you have a favorite orchid? If so, let us know by tagging us on social media.